Хорошо. Вот это на 4 минуты. ID особенно просит тоже из того, что только что заказали. По
The
мелочи.
chicken powered
Давайте. Очень просит с оригинальными, поэтому давайте тогда с переводом. Субтитры перевести на русский. Давайте так.
the chicken powered nuclear landmine. That'll get their attention. Alright, here's the deal. Once upon a time on April 1st, 2004, the British government, aka America Original Recipe, came out and declassified a bunch of documents from the Cold War. Among those documents were those
ID, зачем именно на английском? Скажи. Люди будут прям, прям тяжело людям обычно это слушать. Я-то понимаю, то есть, чисто я пойму. Просто людям неудобно. Экспрессия, ладно.
pertaining to Operation Blue Peacock, more commonly referred to as the chicken-powered nuclear landmine. And I know what you're thinking, April 1st is April Fool's Day. Clearly, this was an April Fool's joke, right? Wrong. So wrong, in fact, that the head of the National Archives had to come out like a week later and release another statement saying, and I quote, "The civil service does not do jokes." Which is honestly probably the most British thing I've heard in my entire life. To come out on April Fool's Day with a straight face and not
Это единица, это оригинальная скорость.
as an April Fool's joke, saying, hey guys, we spent a bunch of your tax money making a chicken-powered nuclear landmine. Also, we're just gonna pepper in at the end that we're called the civil service, which literally means to be polite, because there's nothing more polite than trying to make a bunch of extra crispy communists with a fucking nuclear landmine. It's so much dry humor that it's physically painful. So what on earth would compel the British government to make such a foul weapon? I don't care. I'm proud of that dad joke. I think it was impeccable. Jesus Christ. Real quick, this video does have a sponsor because, well, we're talking about killing animals, which means that PETA will be coming after me with their cool, clammy iron deficient. Brought to you by got to shoot last technology. Two, the wall was still, anyways, it's all because it was the Cold War in the 1950s. Germany was still split in two. The wall was still up. The Iron Curtain was still drawn. There was East and West, hungry and fed, you know, the whole shtick. So naturally, Great Britain, just like the US, was coming up with all kinds of ridiculous strategies on how to stop Soviet expansion, should it come to that. And one of the ideas they had was to have a nuclear minefield. And for a nuclear minefield, you need nuclear mines. So they took apart one of their nuclear bombs, stuck it in a mine, bada bing, bada boom, you have the nuclear landmine. This thing was going to be buried 35 feet deep all along the border, and it was going to generate a 10 kiloton explosion that would blow a...
Сладкие времена холодной войны в Европе. Зарыть вдоль границы с ГДР ядерные мины, которые должны взорваться, если советские войска пойдут в наступление. Я слышал об этом, конечно, красота. Какие времена сладкие-то были.
640-foot in diameter crater where each landmine was. Basically, Great Britain was going to blow up anybody anywhere remotely near it, and then they were going to have a radioactive moat between them and communism. Now, because the landmines were going to be 35 feet underground, the only way they knew how to reliably detonate them was going to be to use a timer. So they were going to have these 35-foot holes pre-dug, they were going to have the landmines there and ready, and then whenever the Soviets were advancing, they would set the landmines to explode in a week, throw them in the hole, bury them, and retreat, and then the
Да ладно.
Soviets would take over that area, and 1 week later they'd get blown up. However, the problem with that was 35 feet below ground was too cold and too wet, and it was going to cause the electronics to prematurely detonate the warhead unpredictably. So the clock idea was out, so what do? You gotta keep...
Это просто пи***ц. То есть в случае наступления советских войск надо было вырыть, яму, закинуть туда ядерную мину, поставить таймер на неделю и уехать. Охуеть. Что, блядь?
Out, so what do? You gotta keep it warm.
Так, опять ускорение. Во.
Keep it warm. You gotta keep it's too cold and too wet, and it was going to cause the electronics to prematurely...
Но под землей немножечко холодно и немножечко мокро, поэтому электроника могла выйти из строя и взорваться раньше, чем все успеют съебаться.
Detonate the warhead unpredictably. So the clock idea was out, so what do? You gotta keep it warm, you gotta keep it airtight, and you gotta have it on some kind of timer. Clearly, the only thing that we can do is depressurize this landmine inside of a fucking capsule, and then inside of that capsule, we're gonna put some chickens with enough food, water, and air to survive for a week. That way, when the chickens die inside the landmine from dehydration, starvation, and suffocation, their body heat is gonna dissipate, the landmine's gonna get cold, and then it's gonna blow up. Fucking science, I guess.
Что, блядь? Но для того, чтобы использовать, ну, не электронный таймер, можно придумали, как сделать курицу в клетку, в бомбу, под землю, курица дохнет, ее тепло постепенно рассеивается, когда тепло заканчивается, бомба взрывается. Да.
Like, this is the craziest fucking quack bang in the history of humanity. If you think Schrodinger's cat is interesting, fucking Britain's chicken landmine blows that shit out of the water, okay? You're not gonna have to guess whether the chicken is alive or dead or both all at once. You're gonna fucking know when the chicken dies, okay? Could you imagine being a Soviet soldier hanging around thinking about eating lunch or, you know, whatever communists do? It's been like 6, 7, 8 days since your last big offensive when you took some land, and then all of a sudden all you hear is...
Did it, Patrick! We saved the city!
I would pay so much money to have been in the meeting when somebody suggested using chickens to keep underground nuclear landmines warm. Like, what was the logic that went into that? Like, I mean, fuck it, they keep eggs warm, they should work, right? Thankfully for all of us, however, these weapons were never actually used because somebody with some common sense chimed in and was like, hey, maybe we shouldn't be leaving nuclear booby traps all over West Germany. And then apparently everybody came to their senses, said, yeah, that's probably a good idea. I presume muscle memory then kicked in for the British because they took the only remaining prototype and put it inside of a museum. So yeah, that's it. That's really all I got. I guess in conclusion, even death tastes like chicken. Thank you for watching. Best.
Пиздец какой. Нет, я не знал этой истории, это прикольно. Маленькая, очень смешная история. Хорошо, что мы все-таки немножко не настолько ее